Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here again, as always. Last time I was here, I apologize to all of you publicly for disbelieving in the Tea Party when I first heard about them starting up in Wisconsin at a anti-tax rally, and somebody asked me if I thought that it would last, and I said no, never has before. And this time I was dead wrong. And thank God I was, because the people that the Tea Party elected in 2010 saved us in the Congress this year. That's not saying much, but it is a salvation at least, because it saved us from things that could have gone even worse than they have gone. I'm here again on the way to Siskiyou County. When I was here last time, I told you about the plan that we had put together to try to rebuild the economy up there. I am under contract with the county now to help them prevent the destruction of the dams on the Klamath River, and also to help stave off the plan for restricting the habitat of the coho salmon in such a way that it will make forest development, as well as grazing and farming and ranching and everything else, worse than it is already. In addition to that, I hope that before I leave on Thursday, I hope we have the complaint ready to file for the Siskiyou water users, challenging the agreement and the validity of the agreement under which the destruction of the dams is planned, for being in violation of California public meeting law. Because the people who sat and entered that agreement were public officials, and the meetings were closed, and we have an affidavit from a witness who participated in it as to the manner in which it was closed to the public. And I'm satisfied that it is in violation of the California law. The Secretary of Interior participated in those meetings, and we believe that without the agreement, we believe that the Secretary of Interior, it will be impossible for him to move ahead with the decision to destroy the dams. It's impossible for me to believe that there is such a dysfunctional federal government that the President of the United States endorses clean hydroelectric power, and the Secretary of Interior intends to destroy a dam that provides power to 70,000 businesses and residences. It's impossible for me to believe that the President of the United States issues an executive order to provide for the welfare of rural Americans and for bettering the life of rural Americans. At the same time, the Secretary of Interior intends to destroy dams that provide flood control and provide for the storage of water so that farmers and ranchers can continue to grow until the fall. It's impossible for me to believe that the President of the United States endorses nuclear energy because it's clean and efficient, and the Secretary of Interior withdraws the land in northern Arizona from which 42% of our domestic uranium is taken, so that we will have to import that 42% from Russia. It's impossible for me to believe that the President of the United States orders all the agencies to do all they can to provide for economic growth, and the Secretary of Interior withdraws the mining lands that will cost 4,000 jobs and $40 billion of adverse impact to all of the counties of Utah and northern Arizona. And yet that's the way it is. That's what we've come to. And it's impossible for me to find any way to fight that except the way I do, and that's at the local level. Because those of you who know me know that I gave up the other fight a long time ago, the fight in Congress, where there are, in my estimation, very few members of Congress who even know what the Constitution means, who even know what the 10th Amendment means. I've spoken to several of them, and I know they don't know, because they talk about it creating states' rights, and they want to get into the argument of whether or not the 10th Amendment preserves state sovereignty. A member of the House of Representatives told me last year that state sovereignty disappeared at the end of the Civil War. And I said, well, isn't the only thing that disappeared, isn't it that a state can't secede from the Union by force? Isn't that the only thing that the Civil War settled? Oh, no, it ended state sovereignty. And I asked him how he explained the 10th Amendment, and he said, well, you know, that didn't do anything. That didn't do anything extra other than with what was already in the Constitution. My Lord, if James Madison knew that, and if the men who wrote the Constitution and who refused to ratify the Constitution until the 10th Amendment was ratified, if they had known that by the year 2012 we would have a member of the Congress of the United States who didn't know more about the 10th Amendment than that, would they have ever suffered through that long summer in Philadelphia? I don't think so. If you've been in Philadelphia in the summertime, and if you've been in that room that they shuttered themselves in to write the Constitution, you'd have to think that they would have packed their bags and gone home if somebody had convinced them that we would be in the position that we're in 2012. This is the only republic in the history of the world, where the people who created it believed that God was blessing their efforts. There is no question in the mind of anybody, cannot be a question in the mind of anybody who has read the journals of the Constitutional Convention, who has read the writings of the men who drafted the Constitution, who can believe that they didn't believe that God was blessing the creation of this republic. And where are we today in 2012? We're hanging on for dear life in rural America. Agenda 21, the United Nations effort for world government, is sweeping this country, and it is sweeping it in a way that most people don't understand and that most people would like to deny, including me. In 1990, the Biodiversity Treaty was presented to the United States Senate. And that treaty was the one that would have ratified Agenda 21 as the supreme law of this land. And Chuck Cushman, now a very good friend of mine, R.J. Smith, who was a friend of mine then, Bonner Cohen, Michael Kaufman, I knew them all, they were all friends, and I told them they were nuts. They were conspiratorialists. I said, you guys are wasting time. Let's get busy on something important. Let's save grazing. You're off beating the drums over this Agenda 21 and United Nations world control, and that's just so much malarkey. I mean, it's a myth. It can't happen here. But they did convince the Senate not to ratify the treaty. And within 3 months, the President of the United States had issued an executive order establishing the Sustainability Council. And that Sustainability Council from that day on has implemented Agenda 21 in every department of government. Now, it's not known as Agenda 21 because all of a sudden, after those gentlemen managed to convince enough senators to vote against ratification, Agenda 21 became a red flag. And so in their own publications, they said, let's not call it that anymore because that gets the paranoia of Americans up. They're paranoid about their private property rights and they're paranoid about their sovereignty, so let's not call it that. Let's call it sustainable growth. Let's call it sustainability. Let's call it sustainable resources. Let's call it smart growth. Let's call it growth management. Let's call it comprehensive growth planning. Let's call it anything but what it is. But regardless of what it's called, when you see the word sustainability, run for your life, and then after you quit running, come back and fight it. Because sustainability, sustainable resources, smart growth, growth management, regionalization of water management, regionalization of land use planning, regionalized government, all of those are designed to implement world government. Take a look at the website on ICLEI. The International what? There you go. Enter that in your search engine. And you'll see that what they say on their own website is that this is the organization by which local governments will implement world government. And then look at that website and see which of the towns in California have subscribed to it, and the counties. They've got every town and every city and every county in the world who has subscribed to Agenda 21, to world government. And every town and every city and every county that has signed on to it and gotten money for the planning has signed an agreement by which they pledge to support international law as the primary law of the town, city, or county. Not the California Constitution, not California statutory law, not the Idaho Constitution, but international law. And if you look at that, and then look at the pledge that they take when they're sworn in as an elected official, take a look at the difference. Because what they're pledging by taking that money is contrary and foreign to the pledge they take to support the Constitution of the state, the Constitution of the United States, and state law. Look at Agenda 21, and you'll find a 700-page document that covers every element of life. Everything. Water, land, reproduction, human inhabitants, the number of, the limitation on family, the limitation on population, and the corridoration. Now that's not a word, but I made it up. If President Bush could make up words, I can. So, corridoration, where you establish wildlife corridors down through the United States for species to travel from Canada to the Yucatan. And no human beings in there. No humans at all. You move them out. Move them into the urban areas. Somebody asked me today, isn't that playing into terrorists' hands? You make these, if you put everybody in the urban areas, don't you make it easier for terrorists? Well, probably so, but what you really make it easier for are the land and water control people who are trying for world government, and the only way they can get there is to destroy private property rights in the United States, and they've recognized that and they've said so. In reported articles, they've pointed out that the biggest problem to world government is the paranoia of Americans as to their private property rights. And somehow that's got to be overcome. And it's too expensive for the government to take all that property by eminent domain, and so they have to find another way to do it, and the way this writer suggested was conservation easements. Get somebody to buy a conservation easement and then make the land use so restrictive that the owner can't continue to operate and he has to sell. And these conservation easement holders will be there to buy at a bargain basement price and then sell it to the government and get their money back, and the federal government then owns the land. And it's being done in all 50 states. And if you want to see how prevalent it is in California, go on your California Fish and Game website and look at the California Wildlife Action Plan. Every state was required to produce one, and it had to be approved in D.C. And when it was approved, they got millions of dollars, each state, to buy private land in the name of the government. You'll find Shasta County there, and you'll find the Fish and Game priorities for Shasta County, for every county in California. And then go on any other state and take a look and see the comparison of the wildlife action plans for each of the 50 states. Lakeshore regulations, water regulations, that's a part of Agenda 21. In Montana, the Glen Lake Irrigation District, we were fighting the imposition of lakeshore regulations on a man-made reservoir. Under Montana law, if a lake has special needs for cleanup, the county can impose lakeshore regulations. They have to be patterned for the specific needs of the lake. So at the hearing, I asked the county planner whether she wrote these. Well, yes, she did. I said, you wrote them yourself? Well, I gathered material here and there, but I put them all together. So I started asking the specifics of the problems of the lakes that she was endeavoring to solve. And of course, none of them applied to this irrigation reservoir because it's not a natural lake. But she tried to justify them and said she had written them particularly for the lakes in the county. So before the next session of the hearing, I decided to go on Google with my limited computer knowledge, and I just typed in lakeshore regulations, and my goodness, did they come up. And I started looking at them. I found some in Florida, and I started picking the states then: Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, Wisconsin, Idaho, Michigan, Utah. Word for word. The same regulations. That didn't seem quite possible to me if you were really designing regulations for specific lakes. So then I compared them to those in Montana. If she wrote the ones for Montana, she wrote them all because they were word for word, comma for comma, the same regulations. And the origin of all of them was the Sonoran Institute of Southern Arizona, which is funded by organizations like the Biodiversity Center and other centers that are anti-grazing, anti-logging, anti-production of any natural resources in the country. They have trained the planners of today. The planners of today have been trained in Agenda 21. I don't think there's an element of your life that you can talk about or think about that is not mentioned and provided for control of in that 700 pages of Agenda 21. But don't think you're going to hear that. Don't think you're going to hear that when your local government is talking about the regional planning that is put into any type of water management or water control. And don't think that the elected officials who are operating on that regional basis have ever read Agenda 21 or read the documents that they're executing in order to create regional government, because they haven't. You remember when the health care bill was to be voted on, and they asked Representative Conyer of Detroit how he was going to vote, and he said he didn't know yet. And they said, have you read it? No. Are you going to take it home to read it over the weekend? Well, it wouldn't do any good. I wouldn't understand it anyhow. 10,000 pages of that bill. 10,000 pages of an appropriations bill 2 years ago that's never been put together in one place, and they voted on it. 150 treaties that the Senate of the United States voted to approve in a bundle by voice vote. They haven't read it. They don't read it. And what's more, unless you folks at this level, at the local level, insist on it, they will continue to put this in place until the sovereignty of the United States is gone. And that's not far off, folks. It's not far off. I told a group today that I spoke to, I don't know who first said the words. I know that Robert Kennedy did because I was in the room when he said this about the civil rights enforcement in the South, and the question was posed as to whether or not the administration, this is when I was in the Department of Justice, whether the administration should take firm enforcement action down there. And he said the words, so I know he said them, if not now, when? And if not us, who? Well, that's what you face. That's what I face. I'm old now. A few months ago, I woke up and remembered that, and suddenly realized that I heard President Roosevelt announce the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I didn't have to read about it, I heard it. I can remember sitting at that radio and wondering what all this was about, but I remember the voice. I remember going to a movie with my parents, and they stopped the movie because President Roosevelt was speaking about the war. Now, you're old when you can remember that. And when you can remember going to a movie for a quarter and being able to buy a popcorn and a Coke and have a penny left over that you could spend for something, then you're old. And so I don't worry about me, but I worry about my grandchildren and yours, and I worry about a whole era of Americans who aren't growing up in the schools that we grew up in, who aren't being trained in the Constitution. I've looked at the history books that my grandchildren study, and understandably, there isn't as much attention spent on the Constitution as was spent when I was there, because they've added 50 more years of history that have to be concerned with. But I look at the 3 pages in the American history book of my 8th grade granddaughter that's devoted to the constitutional history of the United States. And I think it's no wonder that they don't know, that they don't appreciate what all this is about. I've started putting together a project, a seminar-type project that I'm going to offer to Catholic schools, mainly because I know the public schools won't allow it, on the Constitution, on the Revolution and the Constitution, to be given like once a week to an 8th grade class, just to see if I can't make it interesting enough that at least Christian schools and private schools might start to teach it. Because if you understand what these people did, if you understand that every single one of them had something to lose, every member of the Constitutional Convention had more to lose than to gain by establishing this republic. They all were either wealthy or well off. They had everything to lose, and yet they did it. Today, could we find that same group of men, or today men and women, to put into a room and have them come up with the same kind of document? Not if we relied on elected officials. You couldn't do it. Imagine the fact that they couldn't decide how to apportion the Congress of the United States. The big states wanted it by population only. The little states wanted it equal. And they could not compromise. And Benjamin Franklin walked in one day, and to President George Washington he said, "Mr. President, it occurs to me that we haven't been starting these meetings with prayer. It occurs to me that we haven't called on God to guide us through what has become a very contentious point in development of this government." And he made the motion that the Congress hire a chaplain to begin each session with prayer. Alexander Hamilton, the nationalist, who would be a statist today, objected to it on the grounds that he didn't want the people to think that they had to turn to God for help. But secondly, he said, we don't have the money to hire a chaplain. And so it was resolved that there would be no chaplain hired, but one of the members began to lead the days in prayer. And it's probably a coincidence, but within 3 weeks, the grand compromise was reached, in which our House of Representatives represents population and the Senate represents each state equally. And I'm sure it's coincidence. And today's sectarian interests will tell you it's coincidence. Didn't have anything to do with them starting to pray. Didn't have anything to do with them for the first time on the record saying, God has blessed this republic. Well, there are a lot of coincidences that occur, and those coincidences are what makes coordination work, the 10th Amendment work. According to the press, there are people who say that I sell snake oil. There are ranchers all over the West who will tell you that if that's so, they're still in business because they drank the snake oil. In Modoc County, there are loggers who will tell you that They're in business because they took snake oil. Farmers in Logan County, Kansas, and those little people in Texas who stopped the Trans-Texas Corridor, they drank the snake oil too. It is in the law. And that same law that has helped ranchers and loggers and farmers all over the nation and recreation users for access to the public lands is available to stop Agenda 21 propositions. Because everything that happens in the United States, everything that our government does, whether it's in Sacramento or the District of Columbia, where does it have to be implemented? Right here. It has to be implemented at the local government level. And if you can convince your local government to use the coordination effort, the process, and use it right, you can stop those propositions right here. Now, if you stop it in Redding, you may not be able to stop them in Del Norte County. As those mayors in Texas said to me, one of them said, but what about the towns up north of us? And I said, well, do you represent them? Or do you represent your citizens? If they know the process, if they want to use it, let them use it. But stop it here. And they did. On the wall of the community hall room in Holland, Texas, population 1,600, is a plaque that now reads, the Trans-Texas Corridor stopped here. Those 4 little towns stopped. And as I think I've told you before, as I watched those 4 little unpaid mayors come in month after month to meet the suits from Austin, they grew an inch or so in height every time they walked into the room. And the bureaucrats diminished in size because they were being humbled by citizens, by common citizens, who they didn't think began to have the expertise or the intelligence or the sense that they had and brought into the room. Every proposition that I've heard, I heard several today in the meeting, several questions about various regional programs, regional plans, water control, land control. Every one I heard is the type of thing that is being pushed by the United Nations through Agenda 21. And this is the year when the enforcement convention will be held. This is the year when the United Nations will meet and they will begin to execute the enforcement of Agenda 21, which will begin to place penalties, financial penalties, on all of the developed nations of the world, including the United States. And those will be rolled into the United Nations dues that have to be paid. This is the year. Since the 80s when it started, we've been building toward this year. Now, we know that we have enough votes in the Senate to stop the ratification of it, but as we've seen before, that doesn't stop it. It's part of the Farm Bill. It's part of every set of regulations. The Corps of Engineers right now has pending a regulation that I told you the last time I was here about a bill in Congress that would give the Corps of Engineers permit authority over every body of water in the United States. And every piece of land that adjoined the water, was near the water, was affected by the water, or affected the water. The last time I read those words, it meant the entire United States, under permit authority of the Corps of Engineers. Now that was killed in Congress. But today the Corps of Engineers has pending a regulation that will impose the same restrictions, the same permit authority. And it's being held until after the election. Just as the EPA rule as to boilers, steam boilers, was withdrawn until after the election. Under that rule, the standards for steam boilers for industry in the United States are so restrictive that every manufacturer testified to Congress that they could not produce a boiler for United States use that would meet the standards of the EPA regulation, meaning that every industry on the East Coast that uses a steam boiler would be out of business. And so the President had them withdraw that regulation until after the election. I can go through every single agency and show you right now pending regulations, pending rules, pending plans that will enforce some provision of Agenda 21 as soon as they're issued. And they won't be issued until after the election. The Bureau of Land Management just this past week came out with their public notice that they will redo all of their resource management plans in the West in order to protect the sage grouse. But they aren't doing it state by state. They're joining the states so that Utah and Wyoming and parts of Utah and Idaho and Montana are all included in a regional plan, so that no state governor has the authority or the power to step in and prevent the imposition of the rule. Not one single state is considered alone in that plan. Regionalization, which is one of the greatest tools that world government has to use. When you form a regional government, you take away from the electors, you take away from the citizens their right to control what their elected officials do. When you form a board of 5 elected governments, and each one has a supervisor on that board, and the board goes off and makes a decision, what citizens control it? None. Regional planning, regional land use planning, regional water planning is all designed to take away the control that citizens have over their local government. And you know why. Local government is the closest to you. It's easiest to change. You see your city councilmen, you see your county supervisors in the store, you see their foibles in the newspaper. And then if you don't get rid of them and change them, it's your fault. You can't see that in the Congress. You don't see a congressman. Even if you go to their office in D.C., rarely do you see them. You see a staff member, but you don't see the congressman, you don't see the senator. Local government is where you can make changes. It's where you can be persuasive. If, for example, every seat in that county supervisor's meeting room in the morning was filled, when Gary makes his presentation, they would get the message. But if they aren't filled, it doesn't matter to them. And I don't even know them. I know of them, but I don't know them. But they are not unlike any board of county supervisors or commissioners that I've ever worked with. They all are moved by living, voting citizens. I've told you before about how politically, when we do things political in zoning, Stacy, my daughter-in-law, is expert at it. She manages to organize opposition to zoning projects and annexation programs. She makes sure she's counted the seats in the meeting room, and she makes sure that more than that number of people are there an hour and a half or 2 hours before the meeting starts, so that all the seats are filled by the people opposing it. And they all have a little sticker on that costs a penny saying no, so that there's no question when the meeting opens that the elected officials see who's sitting out there. Now, let me tell you something about how elected officials look at this. Remember, I served as counsel to 2 governors, Governor Andrus and Governor Evans in Idaho. Governor Andrus was a good conservative Democrat. Then he was named to be Secretary of Interior by Jimmy Carter and became the most liberal Secretary of Interior in history. Then he came back to Idaho and ran for a 3rd and 4th term and became a conservative again. Governor Evans was a conservative Democrat from beginning to end. He was more conservative than any Republican in the state of Idaho today. But I'll tell you how they decided things. They decided things on the basis of what the voters were saying. I had a Democrat who asked me during Andrus's administration, the first administration, she says, "Fred, Republicans have a better chance of getting in to see the governor than I do." And I said, "Well, Doris, he can count. He knows how many Republicans there are in the state as compared with Democrats. elected officials. I worked with the Canyon County Commissioners for 12 years, the Owyhee County Commissioners for 18 years in Idaho. And it makes a difference to them when they see voting members of the public in the meeting room, because for each of you who take the time to attend a meeting like tomorrow's meeting, they know you could go out and influence 10 or 20 more people. If you have 100 people in that room, that's a pretty sizable block of votes that you could influence, and they know that. That's why coordination is important. That's why I'm spending the last few years that I've got trying to train people to do what I've done for the 20 years. Starting this Saturday on Trademark America's website, and I think it's www.trademarkamerica.org. I just automatically go on there. I don't really know what the .orgs or any of those things mean. But if you go on there, we're presenting a webinar with no limitation to it as to the number of people who can get on. And I'm going to begin intensive training in strategy, not just talking about coordination and how it works, but how to make it work, how to implement it, the strategy of it. This is a process. And the way you make it work is to devise a strategy that gets local government ahead of the agencies, whether it be a federal agency, a state agency, or these regional abominations. It gets local government ahead of them and keeps them ahead of them. And your committees, your natural resource committees, your coordination advisory committees are critical to keeping your elected officials in line. And I mean that, in line. Because it's very easy for them to slip off the wagon if they once get into coordination. It is a simple process, but it's hard work. And it's very easy for them to slip. These committees keep them in line. We'll do this the last Saturday of the next 3 months. And then at the end of that period of time, 12 to 15 of the people who have participated who want to will be invited to come to Nampa to my office for 3 days of really serious, intensive training in strategy as to every strategy I've used in every project that we've won in coordination. And hopefully out of that will come 15 people like Sean Curtis in Modoc County, Ron Olfert in Montana, Steve Curtis in Montana, who can help keep this going after I'm gone. Stacy and John are both good right now, very good. My son, my daughter-in-law's son. They helped under the presidential executive order that was issued in June for the Rural Domestic Council, the one that calls on all the agencies to help better life for rural Americans. He required all agencies to coordinate with local government, but also non-government organizations. Now, was it intended for us? No. It was intended for the non-government organizations that promote Agenda 21. But we use it. Ron Alford has a committee in Montana that for years has tried to get their county commissioners to coordinate, and they won't do it. They say, well, there's nothing wrong with our forests. No, of course there's not. You go out and look, there's a line that you can look at from the highway, and on one side of that line is a matted, dying forest, never cleared after the last forest fire. The trees are diseased, they're falling down, waiting to burn again. And on the other side, it's very clear. New trees are developing. The old lumber was taken out. Why? Because the Indians own that. And they didn't have to respond to anybody. The Forest Service owns the other side. And they had to respond to the environmental groups that wouldn't let them go in and clean the forest out. Well, Ron's group has tried to persuade the commissioners to act, and they never have. They've been together for several years. And we decided that as a trial, that would be a good pilot to try to use this executive order. And so we helped them write a letter to the supervisor of the Lolo National Forest, who doesn't have a great record for coordinating with local governments. And we cited the executive order and cited the responsibility of all agencies to abide by the orders that the president issued. And she agreed to come to a coordination meeting with this group. So Stacy and John were dispatched to Montana ready to fight the fight. And she came in and listened to them and said, I've looked at coordination. I know that what you're saying is right. And so we will involve you with our planning committee, our planning team, and you can start helping us develop the scoping portion of the revision of our forest plan. So now we know we have something we can use if your local government says no. We have a way now for non-government organizations to use this same process to circumvent the naysayers at the local government level. And in other places, we're going to the towns and cities and districts. In Glen Lake Irrigation District, since I talked to you the last time in Montana, Fish and Wildlife has finally held up their hands in surrender and said, look, you guys just do your own habitat conservation plan for the endangered bull trout, and we'll just help you monitor it. Now, I don't know of anywhere that's happened, anywhere else in the United States. So that bottle of snake oil went down real good. Trademark America is the foundation that we've formed. The purpose of it is to develop the 10th Amendment tools for local government. We need your help, just as we did last year. We need funding to keep the foundation going. We get that from counties that are working with us, but we need it from citizens too. And I ask for your support for the foundation, and I ask you to join us on that website. One of the things that I've asked is for somebody to pass around tonight a list for you to give us your email addresses, because we have a major issue coming up. It's major. The Forest Service is changing its planning rules. And Sean Curtis and I have seen the advanced draft, and they're taking coordination out of the rule. Now, they can't take it out of the statute, but it becomes that much more difficult if it's taken out of the rules. But we did see on Friday of last week the word that they have indefinitely postponed the issuance of the rule, probably until after the election. But we need the support of Americans all over the West to petition the Secretary of Agriculture to not change that rule. That rule is important to every agency. It's important to every issue, not just logging. It's important to water management. It's important to water use and water control. It's important to show the Forest Service and the Secretary of Agriculture and the White House that the Corps of Engineers rule is a bad rule. And so what we hope to do is to gather support from Americans all over the western states and some of the eastern states that are affected by the National Forest Service rules, and file a petition with names and addresses, email addresses, so that we can verify the fact that Americans are opposing this change in the rule. And you've got to be sure that your members of Congress understand how important coordination is, how important Agenda 21 is, and how important coordination is from a local government standpoint to stop this onslaught of world government onto the United States. Our sovereignty is truly at issue. There is no question about it. And the way you do that is to make sure that your sitting members of Congress understand how important it is, and we're going to try to do that as a foundation. But again, we need the people's names and we need the email addresses so that we can do that. And the other way, and Representative McClintock, for one, understands it. He understands it totally. Our senators from Idaho understand it. Senators Crapo and Risch, Senators Feinstein and Boxer understand it too. But they're not going to be there to support it when the time comes. Our Representative Simpson, who's the chairman of the subcommittee on Appropriations for Interior and Natural Resources understands it. And so far, he's managed to get riders in on appropriations bills that's done several things for us, including stop the implementation of the Secretary of Interior's Wildlands 3310 order that would have tripled the number of acres of public lands that were put in wildlands characteristics and off limits to the public. And then the other way is to make sure that you elect people who understand it. Make sure you elect people who understand Agenda 21 and the danger. Make sure you elect people who aren't going to take away the tool that local governments have and that you as citizens have. And Senator LaMalfa is one of those people. I understand he's running for the position that Representative Herger is retiring from. I'm going to endorse him because I know him. I've talked with him, and I know he knows the danger to American sovereignty from Agenda 21. I'm starting a new blog, and this is separate from Trademark because they can't take these political positions, and it's going to be purely political. And I promise that everybody who's on this list, you'll get notice of it when it starts. And I'm going to look at races around the country. People have asked me for years who I endorse and who I'm in support of, and I never have said it, but this time I'm going to. Where I know somebody and I know them personally and I know that they stand for America and for sovereignty, I'm going to endorse them. I'm going to do everything I can to help them win, and he will be the first one that I endorse because I do know him. One of the things as I sat there tonight, so I ask all of you, if you can, before you leave, please put your name on that list so that we can include you in the petition that we use to help fight this fight. As I was sitting tonight, I looked in the hymnal, and being in a Baptist church, you know, I grew up in South Carolina, and I wasn't Baptist, this is a Baptist church, right? Am I right? It's what? Oh, okay, all right. Well, that's more like what I grew up in. I grew up in a Methodist church, a Southern Methodist church, more Pentecostal than Pentecostal churches. And in the hymnal, I looked at that song that I used to love. My Aunt Jeannie at the Pond Hollow Methodist Church sang louder than anybody in the world, and she sang off key. She had a horrible voice. And when you pulled up in the yard of the church, because in the South, you know, you don't have parking lots, you just pull up on the grass and park, you could hear Aunt Jeannie singing. And my grandmother would say, "Lord Almighty, I wish she'd learn to sing." But the song that I can always remember them singing was "How Great Thou Art." And I was just looking at the words I do every time I walk into a church about how in awesome wonder you consider the stars and the rolling thunder. That's the way I feel about America. That's the way I feel about the Constitution of the United States. Not some document that you have to study, but the rolling thunder of the only republic ever founded by men who believed that God blessed their work. The only one in the history of the world, and the longest living republic that ever has survived. How long can we survive? Today, we elect people that don't have to profess a belief even that God exists. We elect people who won't allow God to be mentioned in statutes or in laws. We have a Supreme Court that strikes down the use of God and Christ in everything, and yet, do you know what the last words that are said in the courtroom before the court starts presiding? God bless this honorable court. the most ironic thing that I've ever seen in all the world. God bless this honorable court. And then they sit there and decide that nobody can pray and nobody can do anything. But not for them. Let's make sure that they get that blessing. Well, this is something that I hope you all undertake. I hope you don't just listen and wait for somebody to do something. I hope you undertake to make it your effort in life to look at this Constitution that is dwindling by the day, and look at this government whose sovereignty is dwindling by the day, and look at it in awesome wonder, and do everything you can locally to make sure that in Redding, in Shasta County, in Weaverville, in Siskiyou County, that it doesn't go easily. Because if they're going to take the land, make it a fight worthwhile. Keep in mind George Washington. Keep in mind that famous portrait of George Washington kneeling in prayer at Valley Forge. And compare that to our elected officials today. Keep in mind the revolutionary fighters who fought with nothing. Keep that in mind as you go forth and do your thing at the local level. Because what you can't accomplish in the District of Columbia, you can accomplish here if you work hard enough at it. Our foundation will be there to help you, and we ask for your help for the foundation so that it will go on long after me, because this is not going to end in my lifetime. I know full well I won't see the turnaround in this nation. But there are a lot of you here who can see it if you make the effort and start bringing young people into the fold and make them understand. Don't ask them to understand, make them understand. Teach them, make them understand that this nation means something. And that if they don't learn it in time, they won't have it. Because I guarantee you that if the Security and Prosperity Council had existed, had come into existence, which President Bush and the Canadian Prime Minister and the President of Mexico had agreed to, and we had had the North American Supreme Court of Justice overseeing the United States Supreme Court, we would not have sovereignty in the United States anymore. And if the Trans-Texas Corridor had been built and extended through the United States so that that Chinese port on the coast of Mexico could send uninspected goods throughout the United States, we would not have the sovereignty of the United States. I still believe, and I believe it more, but this really links me over with the kooks and the conspiratorialists. I still believe, and I'm getting closer to the book, I still believe that we're closing down the public lands so that they can be used as collateral for the Chinese debt. I don't have a doubt in the world, and if I had there's two instances in history that I can point to that you want to study when we've done that. After the Civil War, the North owed a tremendous debt. The South owed a tremendous debt. So the United States pledged its gold and silver to the bank in France and the bank in Germany to pay those debts. We pledged our minerals. And then President Nixon pledged the gold to a bank in France that was making a demand for payment of a debt. And there was such a run on gold that he had to withdraw that, and that's when none of us then could buy gold. And when the government quit relying on gold altogether. Well, that's what's happening now. China has twice told this administration they want collateral and they don't want dollars. Well, what else has the government got? They've got land and they've got water and they've got the minerals and the oil under it, and the Chinese won't wait for the Sierra Club to let them drill. They will drill. China owns the Port of Long Beach, California. China owns 2 expressways around Chicago. China's buying land at the invitation of the governor of Idaho. Buying land near the airport in Boise, Idaho. To own the land and put in manufacturing under the dominion of the Chinese Republic government. And what does that mean? It means the Chinese Communist Army, because they run the government. He's a Republican governor. It doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. These people who are with Agenda 21 and world government are in it for money and control. He's the son-in-law, former son-in-law of J.R. Simplot, who has contracts with China that just don't end. And the people of Idaho are fighting back, and whether they can stop it or not, I think they can. But it's the kind of fight that you folks need to be in too. World government may seem like it's a long ways away from you, but everything that the Shasta County supervisors do with any regional form of management of water and land, and anything that you can trace to that document on Agenda 21 is bringing world government right here. Look at ICLEI, look at that website, look at one of the agreements, and look at the towns and cities in California that have signed those agreements, and find out the ones that have pledged that international law is the primary law that they will follow in those towns and cities. I just ask you all to join with us in the fight. It's been a fun fight. I used to get great pleasure in the early days out of just filing a brief with the BLM at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and know I had spoiled somebody's weekend. But now it takes a little more to amuse me. I must admit that the Trans-Texas Corridor amused me greatly. And we're working on some things now, including the withdrawal of that uranium land, that if we can pull off the reversal of that so that we don't have to go to Russia for 42% of our domestic uranium, that will please me no end. But every little victory also pleases me. It's like I've told you before, when I was a criminal defense attorney, even a delay was a victory because all my clients were guilty. And so the longer I could delay them getting to justice, the better off they were, and the better off I was from the standpoint of them paying my fee before they had to go off to jail. And that's not true, and I've corrected myself before. I did have one that was innocent. He was charged with bank robbery, and he was in jail on another robbery charge at the time of the bank robbery. And I don't know, some of you may not have heard this, and I'm going to end with this. I put the poor witness through a real grueling cross-examination at the preliminary hearing, asking her, now, what is there about this guy that you remember? Well, his eyes. What about his eyes? And his shoulders, the way he held his shoulders. Well, what about it? Stand up. Tell us what it is. And the judge is looking at me like I'm nuts because I'm making the state's case. And then when I let her go off the stand, I said, Judge, I do have one witness to call. And that was unusual at a preliminary hearing. So I called the warden of the city jail, and he produced the documents that showed that my client was in jail at the time of the bank robbery. And the judge says, Fred, why didn't you just tell me that? And I said, and miss my only Perry Mason opportunity? Thank you all. Be good Americans.